What are the ages of the homeless children in your program?
Gain shares hospitality, which is emergency shelter meals and interim housing. With homeless families that include children, we define kids as a young person up through age 18. Occasionally, we'll have a 19 or 20-year-old, and they still qualify in a family as long as they're still in high school or maybe working on a GED.
How long is a typical homeless family enrolled in your program prior to finding permanent housing?
Families come to us and are in our community. It's a rotation among host congregations. The average time is between 4 and 5 weeks, so that's four to five different congregational spaces that they call home. And then we plan, as a general rule, for a 90 to 120 day period in some of our interim housing.
What is the daily routine of a typical family that is enrolled in your program?
Excellent question. Our congregations provide the shelter and the meals for families. So families will have spent the night at a host congregation such as Chandon and my congregation, First Baptist here in Greenville. Usually they rise at about 6 in the morning. Folk get up and make their own breakfast, so the congregation is provided for that. At 7 a.m., everyone departs from the congregation. Our bus comes and picks up those who need transportation this week. All three families at Advent need that, and so we're glad to provide it. So families head out of the congregation, which then is not available to them during the day. Children go to school, go to daycare. Adults either go to work, and most of our families are working in some capacity, or they are heading to some sort of program that would help them find employment or find housing. So rarely do we have a lot of folk here at our day center. Actually, we're now calling this our resource center. But that happens. You met someone who was here earlier. She will go to work this afternoon. She works second shift, and she has three little boys. And her fiance is with her. So that was their schedule this morning. They arose, got the boys ready. We picked them up, dropped the kids off at daycare. The fiance went on to work. She will go to work at the afternoon, and they'll switch out the responsibility for the children. That's where they'll be through the day. At 5 o'clock, our congregations open again, and the families migrate back there. A lot of our families have their own transportation, and so they'll get back there in time for supper, which is generally 6:30. Folk hang out and play in the basketball in the gym or playground, get homework done, so forth. In the evening, we like to have everybody in the building by 9, and lights are out at 10.
Notice a difference in attitude between younger children and teens. How do these attitudes differ between male and female teenagers?
Really good question. Yes, children, as a general rule, are very resilient. Their main criteria are is their family going to be together, and then those who are in school, will they get to remain in their current school? And as you know, federal law, the McKinney-Vento Act, guarantees that right. So that is a very comforting experience. They know that they'll stay in their current class, they'll have their friends, they know their teacher. Consequently, they'll do better in school, and we guarantee that. In the spring, when we admit a family, we will take them to and from school if necessary. Although the school system here in Greenville County Schools, as huge as it is, it's very accommodating with transportation. So younger children do very well. Middle grade children, elementary age, and younger middle schoolers, again, remaining stable. That's a concern for teenagers. They're much more self-conscious about the circumstance. They want to make sure that their friends don't identify them in terms of their unstable housing situation and have any stigma with that. So there's always issues about that. And then they have a lot more activities in the evening. For example, they want to go to a football game or proms in the spring. That takes some logistical concerns. So their biggest issues are like all other things for teenagers, social in nature. And in terms of guys and girls, we haven't seen a lot of differentiation on that topic for the high schoolers, especially very little from the preschool, none for preschoolers, and very little for elementary age kids. For the high schoolers, there is some consideration especially if they have cohorts of friends that they want to spend time. So we're flexible in schedule, provided that the whole family can move through together. I think one of the big issues is for younger children, just the fact that the family is intact is the priority. For high schoolers, and this happens, if let's say you've got high schoolers with a single parent, they are certainly old enough to realize the gravity of the situation, and sometimes there's a matter of accountability and whose fault this is, and so forth. So a teenager might be more apt to blame a parent, and so we have to help them work through that at times. However, I will say in virtually every case, that is a small concern. What they really want to do is be supportive of the families, and what we really see is teenagers who are trying to carve out some time that they could pick up a part-time job to have more income for their family, which is pretty cool.
What are the most common circumstances that you see that lead to homelessness among families?
Quite a variety. I'd say most often folk are having to live overextended in housing that is not affordable. That is, it exceeds 30% of their adjusted income for the family. Sometimes that's because of a loss of job. Sometimes it is an illness. I'd say probably a third of the families we see have a medical circumstance very much involved in their homelessness. Other cases is extenuating family circumstances. People are mobile. Part of it is Greenville. Folk will call us planning to come to Greenville because it's such a cool place, and they hear there are a lot of jobs, and we have industrial jobs, but you can't just walk in and get one. For example, BMW, we've had probably 4 or 5 calls over the last few months of folks coming to Greenville, including one lady from Indiana, who did not realize that when you work for BMW, you're subbing in through a temp agency, and you're working 7 to 7, either PM or AM. So what are you going to do with your children? You have to have child care that extends past 6 o'clock. You can't drop off a child. From an educational point of view, the schools are wonderful partners. The people who really know kids are teachers, guidance counselors, social workers, principals, assistant principals, cafeteria workers. They know the families, so they know the real dynamics of what's happening. But functionally, an elementary school child cannot be dropped off at the elementary school until 7:15. So do the math. But that's no different from law enforcement that often work 7s, or a nurse at a hospital. They're working 7. So sometimes the logistics can be challenged, and then you add on to that the limited public transportation system that we have. So if mobility is an issue, you can see that very quickly a child's educational success could be impacted significantly and severely by barriers that their whole family faces, and that family could well be a microcosm of the dynamics of poverty in the entire community, or in a neighborhood. We're now in the Nicholtown neighborhood. It has its own pulse, and we're still learning that pulse. But how the entire community works just takes a while, but it is nice, even though we have this gargantuan school system, to have a personal touch and responsiveness in the public schools. And I don't say that just because my wife is a Furman grad and a public school teacher, but it is the truth. We have seen them move the needle for families for the right reason.
What are some of the reasons that you would turn a family away from enrollment in your program?
Well, we're a drug-free, weapons-free, alcohol-free shelter, so we do screen for those matters. We tried to gain a sense of whether a family unit is cohesive, and what I mean by that is that they have a bond. Now, that sometimes is determined by time, but a lot of times it's determined by the quality of the relationship. For example, we have a young couple with us now where 3 little boys, they belong to the mom and the family. The young man who's involved in this family has not been with them a complete year, which is sort of our line to make. But we can tell that there's a genuine bond between these children and this guy. and they may get married one day, they may not. So that bonding is important, so that if someone presents with a lot of times the motif would be a single mom with some kids and then her fiance. If we don't detect that bonding, then we won't admit him. It's almost always a he. And that's a judgment call. You know what? It's a free country, and this is one of the reasons that I'm the director, and we work in a consensus on the staff. Is somebody has to make that kind of gut call, and I think we get it right most of the time. The other major filter for us is domestic violence, and I should have mentioned this earlier in the circumstances that cause family homelessness, but it is a major cause of family homelessness. Oftentimes, the male is the provocateur in the situation. Sometimes children get involved, protecting one parent or another. But it can get very mean. And the violence piece, the way we do the shelter at night at the congregations, it's staffed by volunteers, so they're not equipped to deal with the special circumstances of family violence. So we would not admit a family dealing with an active domestic violence situation if it were residual, had been several months, or the perpetrator was locked up or was somewhere else. Then we would consider that. But the safety of our families, our volunteers, our staff, those are paramount, and domestic violence is nothing to trifle with. There are specialized shelters in town. Safe Harbor here does a fantastic job, but everybody, no one has capacity to serve all the families that have a need. So one thing I will do is give y'all access to the homeless white paper. I don't know if you ever saw the final, but it identifies the fact that right now in our community, we have 6 families in our congregations. We have 25 housing units. There are other programs at Shepherd's Gate, Salvation Army share, and yet we could easily say that at least 15 families tonight could use shelter, and our community is not providing for them. So the need is tremendous.